The T-Rex from Jurassic Park is one of the most recognizable dinosaur designs and movie monsters in the history of film. But the road to actually getting to the completed design came with quite a lot of different interpretations, from green colors to hybrid mutant attributes, and even the studio wanting a more monstrous animal. Today, we're going to be going over just how Jurassic Park's Tyrannosaurus came to be, and how it almost looked. Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. Now for today's video, I think we should go back to the origins of all of this and start talking about the beginning of Steven Spielberg making Jurassic Park. I know it's been said in a lot of different places that James Cameron and Tim Burton and others almost got to make the movie, but Spielberg is really the only one that Michael Crichton always wanted to go ahead and adapt the novel. In fact, in 1989, the manuscript for the book actually started floating around Hollywood, and special effects artist Michael Trissick happened to get his hands on it, which we'll get back to him later. But first, we've got to go to the summer of 1990, where a green Tyrannosaur design was what Snark Safari Studios first proposed. The following information comes from a very detailed description of this entire process that I'll link to for you guys down in the description below. Now, at this point in the timeline, the T-Rex was going to have these interesting iguana-esque spikes run down its back, not too dissimilar to the Allosaurus and Giga that we've seen in newer movies. Now, this article goes on to say that, quote, "In the summer of 1990, the professional paleo artists John Gersh and Mark Hallett were hired to create concept art for Jurassic Park in its early stages, and both their first assignments were to create concept art for the Tyrannosaurus. Hallett's work is the most well documented, a self-published article in the Prehistoric Times magazine being one of the most extensive accounts. Hallett's role, as he recalls, was to offer advice to the film's concept artists and computer animators to make sure the dinosaurs had correct anatomy and that they were biomechanically possible. In addition to what he drew for the film, work that Hallett had created prior and contemporaneously was also used. In early June of that same year, Tim Lawrence and his company Snark Safari Studios was hired by Steven Spielberg to create the dinosaurs for Jurassic Park in its earliest stages. Lawrence recalls that Spielberg said that Dennis Muren, a member of Industrial Light and Magic and who would become visual effects supervisor of the film, had recommended Lawrence to him. Prior to this call, Lawrence had worked with ILM in late May 1990 when they were trying to get the bid for Jurassic Park. Now, when Tim Lawrence first started working on the film, believe it or not, the idea was to actually incorporate the lore of amphibian DNA more accurately into the plot of the movie itself by having the dinosaur designs actually take on characteristics of frogs. In the final film, this is all sort of abandoned, but at this early stage in development, they wanted to ground it a little more by making it obvious that some of the dinosaurs took on those attributes from gene splicing. Quote, "At this early stage, Steven had some ideas, since in the story, the dinosaur genome was completed with elements from frog DNA. He wondered if the dinosaurs should have some frog features, such as facial ridging like you'd see in frog faces. At the first meeting, I roughed in 2 busts that exchanged hands between Steven and I for about an hour. Mark Hallett had some neck wrinkle input, and Rick Carter was focused on the eyes. Kathleen Kennedy was also interested in the eyes. So this was the first day, and a lot of ideas in one place. That's how most visual development starts before directions emerge. Next day, Steven was done with the frog idea, and I put these pieces on the shelf and started the next model, which I find to be really interesting because they explored the entire idea of frog DNA being attributed to these dinosaurs after they were gene spliced together and cloned, but then literally a day later, Steven was like, nah, don't think I'm going to use it. Now, there has been some confusion as to the exact date of when some of the models back then were made, with some saying one of Tom Hester's busts was made in 1991 before Stan Winston Studios got on board, but most of the info says this stuff happened back in 1990. Now, after all of that, Stan Winston Studios was finally approached and Crash McCreery drew this image of a T-Rex for the film. However, even though Crash McCreery was pretty on point with conceptualizing the dinosaurs in the most current and up-to-date info, the team wouldn't actually fixate on this design until a little later, because, quote, "After their completion, Stan Winston showed the drawings to Steven Spielberg. McCreery told Cinefex that Spielberg was critical of the T-Rex's feet, saying that they were a little too bird-like and small, and thought the legs should be longer to hold the dinosaur's weight. In addition, Spielberg felt the forearms looked weak. Overall, the drawings McCreary produced gained the positive reception from Amblin Entertainment and Universal Studios. Afterward, McCreary created several more drawings of the T-Rex, depicting it with a more stockier appearance. It has been stated by several paleo artists that worked on the film, Mike Trisick, Gregory S. Paul, and Mark Hallett, that Stan Winston would order changes to the T-Rex that differed from the animal's actual anatomy for the sake of artistic license. Trisick states that Winston liked the initial designs but wanted the T-Rex to be more fierce-looking. Paul, whose work was not only influential on McCreary and Trisick's work on Jurassic Park, but was also listed in the acknowledgments for the original Jurassic Park novel and created skeletals of the T-Rex for the film, claimed that Trisick told him that Spielberg and Winston ordered the alterations, in part so they could make the dinosaur designs copyrightable. Speaking of which, here is a really cool picture that apparently shows Mike sculpting an early version of the 1/5 scale Stan Winston maquette that comes complete with what is alleged to be the skull from the Snark Safari Studios, which if true is really interesting. Now going back just a little bit, I do find it fascinating that the design they ultimately used was at first deemed not fierce enough, and that the design went into this much more bulky and mean interpretation that we see here, which Michael actually has spoken about.
I love Stan to death, but honestly his sole knowledge of dinosaurs was that they fought giant gorillas. So that was a constant battle for him. It was a daily battle for him. And I tried to push ahead and try to show Stan how cool a authentic T-Rex could look. But he wasn't interested. He wanted me to do the design. The plan was that the T-Rex would have snarly lips and needle-like teeth and movable cheeks and brows and make really scary faces. We'd give it flaring nostrils and just really animate the face. And slowly, after many arguments with Stan, I think he finally came to see how ridiculous the T-Rex was beginning to look. With the completion of the 5th scale Rex and the other dinosaur maquettes done, Stan had Crash redo the pre-production drawings. This time, based on photos of the finished sculptures. So it looked like we intended them to look like this way all along.
Now, even though Stan Winston and Steven Spielberg's requests to change the design were gaining an influence, Mike was actually able to keep the animal looking more like a T-Rex through just basically sticking to the quote dinosaur Bible that they were using from Gregory S. Paul. Quote, Winston and Trisick had many arguments over how the sculpture should look. Paul Majias, another sculptor at Stan Winston's studio, states that over 13 head designs were created for the T-Rex. During the design process, Winston slowly came to accept some of Trisick's input on the maquette, with Trisick stating in regards to how much input he had on the sculpture, I tell people, I think I only got up to 60% of where I really wanted to be. Dinosaur consultant Mark Hallett noted that the final T-Rex had a broader head and that the real animal's rear mouth could not go back as far as the film version. Now, of course, this only accounts for the Stan Winston design of the animal and not the one that Steven Spielberg had even more input on with ILM when they were working on the CGI in post-production, which is actually the model that is used most in the runtime of Jurassic Park. But as far as designs go, I do find it rather interesting that what initially could have been a spiky green animal morphed into a frog mutant before becoming more of what we'd become familiar with, only to jump back into a more monstrous creature just before it went back to being the final design. Knowing this about the history of the Jurassic Park T-Rex and how Hollywood goes about designing their dinosaurs, I think it's helped me understand how a lot of the other animals in the franchise have been created over the years. I can see there being all kinds of input from people in designing things like the Spinosaurus, Indominus, Dilophosaur, and the Giga, let alone animals we never got to see. So I guess it's not really any one specific thing that you can point at and say it's responsible for a specific dinosaur design. Not Steven Spielberg, not Stan Winston, not Jack Horner, not Colin Trevorrow, not Steve Brusatte. It's kind of an amalgamation of inputs. And seeing this old frog version of the Rex, by the way, is equally cool as well, because it's like seeing that concept art of the Indoraptor with all the imperfections and sores on its body, only in a previs bust, which I doubt many fans are even aware of exists. Anyways, guys, these are all just my own thoughts and opinions on the Jurassic Park T-Rex after showing you how it came to be. Now, in the description, I'm going to leave a link down below that was passed on to me, which breaks all this stuff down in great detail, and I think a lot of you are going to have a lot of fun with it. But with that being said, what are your thoughts on the subject matter? What do you think of the unused versions, and how do you think the film would be had they gone for one of those instead of what we wound up with? Personally, T-Rex is my favorite dinosaur. The Stan Winston model in Jurassic Park I think is the best design. The Lost World's Bull T-Rex is what I consider to be my favorite T-Rex and dinosaur in the whole franchise, but all this other stuff, I'm sure you guys agree, it's just so interesting to learn about. But hey, whatever your own thoughts and opinions happen to be, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. Now before I go, I'd like to thank all of my game wardens, as well as all of my InGen executives. I'd also like to thank all of my park workers and InGen hunters as well. Guys, it really means the world to me that you all continue to support what I do, and I never want you to ever forget that. Now, I'd like to thank you all for watching today's video and hope that you all enjoyed the content. If you feel like I deserve it, I'd appreciate the like and hope that you'll consider subscribing if you're interested in hearing from me again. I'll see you all in the next video, guys, and as always, take it easy.